7 years ago, my mother Janet stood in our doorway with that cruel smirk spreading across her face. "You'll be back begging in a month," she said, her voice dripping with certainty. Behind her, my father Robert stepped forward and slammed the front door so hard the whole house shook. I was 20 years old, standing on the porch with 2 suitcases and nowhere to go. Today, my phone buzzes endlessly with their desperate missed calls. The same people who threw me away now beg me to answer. The tables have turned completely, and justice tastes sweeter than I ever imagined. Looking back, the warning signs had been building for months before that devastating moment on the porch. I had graduated from State University with a computer science degree just 6 months earlier, bursting with dreams of starting my own tech company. While my classmates were rushing into corporate cubicles, I wanted something different. I wanted to build something meaningful, something that was mine. But my parents had other plans. Robert, my father, worked as a small-town accountant and believed safety trumped everything else. He had arranged for me to interview at his friend's accounting firm for what he called a stable position with good benefits. The problem was, I kept getting rejected from every job I applied to, despite what seemed like promising interviews. I would walk into these meetings confident and prepared only to receive generic rejection emails days later. "We've decided to go with another candidate," they would say, or "We don't feel you're the right fit for our company culture." It made no sense. I had excellent grades, solid internship experience, and genuine passion for technology. The frustration was eating me alive. My girlfriend Sarah, who I had been dating since junior year, initially supported my entrepreneurial dreams. She would listen to my ideas about developing mobile applications for small businesses, nodding enthusiastically as I explained how inventory management systems could revolutionize local retail operations. But as the rejections piled up and my savings dwindled, I could see doubt creeping into her eyes. "Maybe your parents have a point about the accounting job," she would say during our late-night conversations. "At least it would give you stability while you work on your business ideas on the side." My parents were relentless in their pressure campaign. Every dinner conversation became a lecture about realistic expectations and financial responsibility. Janet would roll her eyes whenever I mentioned anything related to entrepreneurship, calling my plans pipe dreams and fantasy nonsense. Robert would pound the table, insisting that young people today didn't understand the value of hard work and steady employment. "You think you're going to be the next Mark Zuckerberg," Robert would sneer. "Wake up, Norman. That happens to 1 in a million people. The rest end up broke and living in their parents' basements." The tension in our house became unbearable. Every morning brought new arguments about my job search, my future, and what they saw as my stubborn refusal to accept reality. They couldn't understand why I wouldn't just take the safe path they had laid out for me. Then came the discovery that changed everything. I was using Robert's computer to print out my resume for what felt like the 100th time when I accidentally clicked on his email folder instead of the printer icon. What I saw made my blood run cold. There, in his sent messages, were dozens of emails to companies where I had interviewed. My own father had been systematically contacting my potential employers, telling them I was unreliable, immature, and not ready for professional responsibilities. One email to a software startup read, "I feel obligated to inform you that my son Norman lacks the maturity and work ethic necessary for your organization. As his father and a business professional in this community, I would strongly advise against hiring him for any position requiring independence or responsibility." Another message to a local marketing firm stated, "Norman has unrealistic expectations about employment and refuses to accept entry-level positions appropriate for his experience. He would likely be a disruptive influence on your team dynamics." I sat there staring at the screen, my hands trembling with rage and disbelief. My own parents had been sabotaging my future, actively working to destroy my chances of independence. They weren't trying to protect me from failure. They were ensuring my failure, so I would have no choice but to accept their vision of my life. When I confronted them that evening, neither Robert nor Janet showed any remorse. They defended their actions as necessary intervention. "We were protecting you from making a terrible mistake," Robert said, his voice matter-of-fact. "These startup companies would have used you up and thrown you away. At least now, you'll consider the accounting position seriously." Janet crossed her arms and glared at me. "You're acting like a spoiled child, Norman. We know what's best for you, because we've lived in the real world. Your generation thinks everything should be handed to you on a silver platter." The betrayal cut deeper than any physical pain I had ever experienced. These were the people who were supposed to support me, believe in me, help me achieve my dreams. Instead, they had been working behind my back to crush my spirit and force me into their mold. "I will never work at that accounting firm," I told them, my voice shaking with emotion. "I will never give up on my dreams because you're too scared to let me try." That's when Janet delivered her ultimatum, with that familiar smirk I would remember for years to come. "Fine," she said coldly. "If you won't accept our help and our wisdom, then you can figure out life on your own. Take the accounting job, or find somewhere else to live. You have until the end of this week to decide." The choice was clear. I could surrender my dreams and accept their control, or I could bet everything on myself and face the unknown. Despite the terror of being completely on my own, I knew there was only one answer I could live with. "I'll be out by Friday," I said. And that's exactly what I did. Friday morning arrived gray and drizzling, matching my mood perfectly as I stuffed my belongings into 2 battered suitcases and a cardboard box. Janet and Robert watched from the living room window as I loaded everything into my beat-up Honda Civic, their expressions cold and unmoved. There was no last-minute reconciliation, no tearful goodbye, no moment of parental softness. As I walked toward the front door for the final time, carrying my laptop bag and the box of personal items, Janet positioned herself directly in my path. Her smirk was even more pronounced than it had been during our confrontation earlier that week. "You'll be back begging in a month," she said, her voice filled with absolute certainty. "Maybe even sooner, when you realize how expensive the real world actually is." Before I could respond, Robert stepped up behind her and slammed the door with such force that the sound echoed through the entire neighborhood. I stood there on the porch for a moment, staring at the closed door, processing the finality of what had just happened. My childhood home, the place where I had grown up, learned to ride a bike, graduated high school, was now officially off-limits to me. The first few weeks of homelessness were brutal in ways I hadn't anticipated. I slept in my car in 24-hour diner parking lots, showered at the local gym, using a temporary membership, and survived on fast food and whatever I could afford with my dwindling savings. My friend Jake let me crash on his couch for a few nights, but his roommates complained about the arrangement, and I couldn't impose on his generosity indefinitely. During the day, I continued applying for jobs, but without my parents' sabotage, I was still struggling against a tough job market and my own inexperience. I picked up work wherever I could find it, waiting tables at a chain restaurant, delivering pizzas on weekends, doing odd jobs for people who posted on community bulletin boards. The work was exhausting, and the pay was minimal, but it kept me fed and put gas in my car. Sarah's support, which had been wavering even before I left home, evaporated completely once she saw my actual living situation. She would meet me for coffee and spend the entire conversation suggesting that maybe my parents had been right about the accounting job. "This is insane, Norman," she would say, looking around nervously as if my circumstances might be contagious. "You're sleeping in your car and working at a pizza place. How is this better than having a stable job and a place to live?" I tried to explain that it wasn't about better or worse in the short term. It was about refusing to let anyone else control my future, about proving to myself that I could survive and eventually thrive on my own terms. But Sarah couldn't understand why I would choose struggle over security. "Your parents love you," she would insist. "They just want you to be safe and successful. Maybe if you apologized, and showed them you're willing to compromise. Those conversations became increasingly painful until we both realized our relationship had run its course. Sarah wanted the version of me that would accept conventional wisdom and take the safe path. I was becoming someone who would rather fail pursuing my own dreams than succeed following someone else's plan. The breaking point in our relationship came during a particularly difficult period, about 2 months after I left home. I had been staying in a cheap motel room, stretching my savings to afford 3 nights of actual shelter and hot showers. Sarah came to visit and immediately started crying when she saw the dingy room with its stained carpet and broken air conditioner. "I can't watch you destroy your life like this," she sobbed. "Please just call your parents. Please just take the job. I love you, but I can't be with someone who's throwing away every opportunity for some impossible dream." That night, after Sarah left, I sat on the edge of the motel bed and seriously considered giving up. Maybe everyone was right. Maybe I was being stubborn and foolish. Maybe the smart thing to do was swallow my pride and call home. But then, I remembered the emails I had found on Robert's computer, the systematic destruction of my opportunities, the complete lack of faith in my abilities or judgment. I realized that going back wouldn't just mean accepting their help. It would mean accepting that they had been right to sabotage me, right to control me, right to dismiss my dreams as worthless fantasies. The next morning, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to visit the storage unit, where I kept some of my belongings, including items that had belonged to my late grandfather, to see if there was anything I could sell to extend my runway while I continued job hunting. My grandfather, Walter, had been a motorcycle enthusiast who collected vintage Harley-Davidson bikes throughout his life. When he passed away 3 years earlier, he had left his collection to me in his will, along with a note saying he hoped I would appreciate the craftsmanship and history of each machine. My parents had moved the motorcycles to a storage unit, claiming they would help me figure out what to do with them when I was more mature and responsible. I should have realized something was wrong when the storage unit manager looked confused as I showed him my identification and explained why I was there. "I'm sorry, son," the elderly man said, checking his records twice. "But that unit was cleared out about 6 months ago. The folks who had the contract took everything and terminated the lease." My heart sank as the implications hit me. "What folks? What do you mean cleared out?" "Your parents, I assume." Middle-aged couple paid in cash, had all the proper paperwork, took everything in a big truck, said they were consolidating storage locations to save money. The manager showed me the paperwork, and there were Robert and Janet's signatures clear as day. They had cleaned out my grandfather's collection without telling me, without asking me, without any explanation whatsoever. "Do you know what happened to the motorcycles?" I asked, though I was beginning to suspect the answer. "Can't say for certain, but I saw them loading some beautiful bikes onto that truck. Classic Harleys looked like. Worth a pretty penny, I'd imagine." I drove directly to my parents' house, my anger building with every mile. When I confronted them about the storage unit, their response was even more callous than I had expected. "We needed the money," Robert said bluntly. "Storage fees were adding up, and you clearly weren't in a position to take care of those motorcycles properly." Janet nodded in agreement. "Besides, you never even rode them. They were just sitting there collecting dust while we were paying for storage month after month. Those bikes were worth at least $15,000. I said, my voice rising. "They were my inheritance. Grandfather left them specifically to me. And as your parents, we made a responsible decision about assets you couldn't manage," Robert replied coldly. "We used the money to pay down credit card debt and take care of family expenses. You should be grateful we didn't ask you to contribute to storage costs over the years." I spent the next day researching my legal options and discovered that while I technically had a case for recovering my inheritance, the statute of limitations had already expired. My parents had timed the sale perfectly to avoid any legal consequences. They had stolen $15,000 worth of classic motorcycles that held immense sentimental value and there was nothing I could do about it. That night, sitting in my car in the parking lot of the restaurant where I worked, I made a promise to myself. I wasn't just going to survive without them. I was going to succeed beyond their wildest imagination. They had taken my inheritance, sabotaged my job prospects, and thrown me out of their home. But they couldn't take my determination, my intelligence, or my willingness to work harder than anyone they knew. The real battle was just beginning. The months following the discovery of my stolen inheritance became a crucible that forged the person I was destined to become. Instead of being crushed by my parents' betrayal, I channeled my anger into pure determination. Every humiliation, every night sleeping in my car, every condescending comment from Janet and Robert became fuel for my drive to prove them catastrophically wrong. I finally found stability by responding to a Craigslist ad for roommates in a 3-bedroom apartment across town. My new living situation wasn't glamorous. I shared space with 2 other guys in their early 20s who were also starting their careers, but it represented my first real step toward independence. Marcus worked at a local warehouse and spent his evenings studying for his electrician certification. Tyler was a part-time community college student who delivered food during lunch rushes to pay for his classes. Neither of them cared about my family drama or unconventional career path. They just needed someone who could pay their share of rent on time and respect communal living arrangements. For the first time in months, I had a permanent address, reliable internet access, and roommates who actually encouraged my entrepreneurial ambitions instead of mocking them. My breakthrough came when I landed a position as a junior developer at a small tech startup called Digital Solutions. The company had only 8 employees and operated out of a converted warehouse space downtown. The salary was modest, but the work environment was everything I had hoped for: collaborative, innovative, and focused on solving real problems for local businesses. My supervisor, Kevin, was only 3 years older than me, but had already built and sold one company. He became an unofficial mentor, sharing insights about the tech industry, while giving me increasingly complex projects to develop my skills. During our lunch breaks, he would review my business ideas and provide feedback about market opportunities and technical feasibility. "Your inventory management concept has real potential," Kevin told me one afternoon as we grabbed sandwiches from a food truck. "Small businesses are drowning in inefficient systems, but they can't afford enterprise-level solutions. If you could build something specifically for restaurants, retail shops, and service companies with fewer than 50 employees, you'd have a massive market." Those conversations rekindled my passion for entrepreneurship. I began spending evenings and weekends developing a mobile application that would allow small business owners to track inventory, manage suppliers, and generate automated reports from their smartphones. The work was challenging and exhausting, but it felt meaningful in ways my parents could never understand. My relationship with Sarah had ended completely by this point, but I wasn't dwelling on romantic complications. I had discovered a community of young entrepreneurs who gathered at coffee shops and co-working spaces around the city, sharing ideas and supporting each other's ventures. These people understood the risks and rewards of building something from scratch. As my coding skills improved and my app development progressed, I started taking on small freelance projects to supplement my startup salary. Local businesses needed websites, database management systems, and custom software solutions. Word spread about my work, and I gradually built a reputation for delivering high-quality results on time and within budget. My financial situation stabilized for the first time since leaving home. I was covering my share of rent, building a small emergency fund, and even starting to invest modest amounts in my retirement account. The contrast with my parents' predictions couldn't have been more stark. Instead of crawling back to them begging for help, I was laying the foundation for long-term success. But just as things seemed to be falling into place, I encountered a devastating setback that revealed the true extent of my parents' vindictiveness. I was attending a monthly networking event for local tech professionals when I approached a potential client who owned several small restaurants around the area. I had researched his businesses and prepared a compelling presentation about how my inventory management app could reduce food waste and improve profit margins. The conversation started promisingly. He seemed genuinely interested in my technical background and asked thoughtful questions about implementation timelines and costs. But then, his demeanor shifted completely, and he looked at me with suspicion and concern. "I have to ask you something directly," he said, lowering his voice. "I've heard some troubling things about your character and reliability. Before we go any further, I need to understand whether those concerns are legitimate." My stomach dropped as I realized what was happening. "What exactly have you heard?" I asked, though I was already beginning to suspect the source. "Well, your own father contacted several business owners in the community. He said you have problems with drugs, that you're unstable and dishonest, and that local businesses should be cautious about working with you." The room seemed to spin around me as the full implications hit. My parents hadn't been content with sabotaging my initial job applications and stealing my inheritance. They had launched a comprehensive character assassination campaign designed to destroy my reputation throughout our entire community. Over the following weeks, I discovered the scope of their malicious campaign. Robert had contacted restaurant owners, retail managers, and service business proprietors throughout the area. He presented himself as a concerned father, trying to protect local businesses from his troubled son. He claimed I was involved with illegal drugs, had mental health issues, and couldn't be trusted with money or responsibilities. The story he and Janet had crafted was devastatingly effective because it played on people's sympathies. What kind of father would say such things about his own son unless they were absolutely true, and he was genuinely worried about protecting the community? I tried to combat these rumors by providing references from my current employer and freelance clients, but the damage was extensive. Several potential customers canceled initial meetings after doing research on my background. Others simply stopped returning my calls without explanation. Even worse, I realized that Sarah's increasing doubts about our relationship had been influenced by these rumors. She had heard whispers from mutual acquaintances and began questioning whether my entrepreneurial struggles were really about market challenges or personal instability. The cruelest aspect of my parents' strategy was how it isolated me from the support network I needed most during this critical period. They had weaponized the close-knit nature of our small town against me, turning my desire to build local business relationships into a liability. That's when I made the decision that would ultimately transform my entire life. I couldn't fight their lies and build my future in the same place where they had poisoned my reputation. I needed a fresh start, somewhere they couldn't reach, somewhere I could be judged purely on my own merits. I started researching tech-friendly cities where a young developer could build a career without legacy baggage. Austin, Texas emerged as the perfect destination, a growing tech scene, affordable living costs, and a culture that celebrated entrepreneurship and innovation. The decision to leave everything behind was terrifying, but necessary. I gave my notice at Digital Solutions, said goodbye to Marcus and Tyler, and loaded my Honda Civic with everything I owned. As I drove past my parents' house one last time, I felt a mixture of anger and liberation. They had tried to crush my spirit and destroy my future, but instead, they had accidentally given me the greatest gift possible: absolute clarity about who I was and what I was capable of achieving. I was no longer the confused 20-year-old who had been kicked out for refusing to accept their limitations. I was Norman, and I was heading to Texas to build the life they said was impossible. Austin welcomed me with open arms and endless possibilities. The city's energy was infectious everywhere I looked. Young professionals were starting companies, building apps, and turning innovative ideas into thriving businesses. This was exactly the environment I had dreamed about during those long nights sleeping in my car. I found a studio apartment in a complex popular with young tech workers and landed a position as a software developer at Innovate Solutions, a growing company that built custom applications for mid-sized businesses. My new colleagues were brilliant, ambitious, and supportive in ways I had never experienced. Nobody cared about my family background or small-town drama. They only cared about the quality of my code and the creativity of my problem-solving approaches. My direct supervisor, Amanda, was a senior developer who had worked at several major tech companies before joining the startup scene. She took me under her wing and helped me navigate the complex technical challenges we faced daily. More importantly, she encouraged my entrepreneurial instincts and provided guidance about the business side of technology development. "You have excellent technical skills," she told me during one of our monthly review meetings. "But you also understand how technology can solve real business problems. That combination is rare and valuable. You should consider developing your own products eventually." Those words meant everything to me because they came from someone who had no agenda other than helping me succeed. After years of dealing with people who wanted to control or diminish me, Amanda's genuine mentorship felt like discovering water in the desert. My personal life was also flourishing in ways I hadn't expected. At a weekend networking event for local entrepreneurs, I met Emma, who owned a small but successful digital marketing firm that helped local businesses build their online presence. She was smart, driven, and passionate about helping other people achieve their goals. Our first conversation lasted 3 hours, as we discussed everything from business strategy to personal philosophy. Emma had also faced skepticism from family members who questioned her decision to start her own company instead of pursuing traditional employment. She understood the isolation and self-doubt that came with choosing an unconventional path. "The hardest part isn't the business challenges," she told me over coffee a few weeks later, after we had started dating seriously. "It's maintaining confidence in your vision when everyone around you thinks you're making a mistake." Emma became my closest confidant and strongest supporter as I continued developing my inventory management application during evenings and weekends. She provided valuable insights about user interface design and customer acquisition strategies. More importantly, she believed in my abilities and encouraged me to think bigger about my potential impact. The app development was progressing better than I had ever imagined. I had secured beta testing agreements with a dozen local businesses, and their feedback was overwhelmingly positive. Restaurant owners loved how the system reduced food waste and simplified ordering processes. Retail managers appreciated the automated reports that helped them optimize stock levels and identify profitable product categories. My confidence grew as I received positive feedback and began planning for a wider launch. The technical challenges that had seemed overwhelming months earlier were now manageable problems I could solve with creativity and persistence. I was becoming the person I had always believed I could be, despite my parents' attempts to convince me otherwise. At Innovate Solutions, I was promoted to senior developer and given responsibility for managing client relationships and project timelines. My salary increased substantially, and I was finally building the financial foundation I needed to support my entrepreneurial goals. I was saving money, building excellent credit, and establishing professional relationships that would benefit me for years to come. The contrast with my parents' predictions was becoming almost comical. Instead of crawling back home begging for forgiveness, I was thriving in ways they had insisted were impossible. I had stable housing, meaningful work, a supportive relationship, and growing business prospects. Emma encouraged me to take the next step and pursue my entrepreneurial dreams full-time. She had built her marketing firm from nothing and understood the financial and emotional challenges of starting a company. Her support meant everything as I considered making the leap from employee to founder. "You're ready," she told me one evening as we reviewed my business plan and financial projections. "You have the technical skills, the market knowledge, and the determination. The only question is whether you're willing to bet on yourself completely." That's when life threw me a curveball that reminded me my parents' capacity for causing damage hadn't ended just because I had moved to another state. I was applying for a car loan to replace my aging Honda Civic when the loan officer looked at my credit report with confusion and concern. According to the report, I had multiple outstanding debts and several missed payments that should have disqualified me from receiving any financing. "I'm seeing some concerning items on your credit history," the loan officer said, showing me the computer screen. "Multiple credit card accounts, a personal loan, and several late payments over the past few years. This doesn't match the employment and income information you've provided." I stared at the report in disbelief. There were credit accounts I had never opened, loans I had never applied for, and payment histories for debts I knew nothing about. My credit score had been destroyed by financial activity that had nothing to do with me. The investigation took weeks and revealed the full extent of my parents' financial fraud. During my final year living at home while they were lecturing me about responsibility and maturity, Robert and Janet had been systematically opening credit accounts using my personal information. They had forged my signature on loan applications and used my social security number to obtain credit cards that funded their lifestyle. The fraudulent debt totaled nearly $8,000 across multiple accounts. My parents had been using my credit to pay for vacations, home improvements, and everyday expenses, while simultaneously telling me I was irresponsible and financially immature. The irony was devastating and infuriating. The same people who had kicked me out for refusing to accept their idea of financial responsibility had been stealing my identity to fund their own irresponsible spending. They had committed federal crimes while lecturing me about the importance of following rules and making safe choices. I consulted with a lawyer who specialized in identity theft cases and learned that pursuing legal action against family members was complex and expensive. The documentation process would require months of paperwork, court appearances, and potentially thousands of dollars in legal fees. Even if I won, collecting restitution from people who had clearly been living beyond their means would be challenging. Emma supported whatever decision I made, but she also helped me think strategically about my options. I could spend months fighting my parents in court and potentially recover some of the stolen money, or I could focus that time and energy on building my business and creating wealth that would dwarf their fraudulent debts. "You're already winning," she pointed out. "Every day you spend succeeding in spite of what they did to you is the best revenge possible. Don't let them steal any more of your time and energy." I decided to focus on credit repair while pursuing my entrepreneurial goals. The process was tedious and frustrating, but within 6 months, I had disputed most of the fraudulent accounts and begun rebuilding my credit score. My income and savings continued growing, and my app development was reaching the point where I needed to make a decision about launching a company. The identity theft had been painful, but it also clarified something important about my relationship with my parents. This wasn't just about different philosophies regarding career choices or financial planning. This was about fundamentally different concepts of morality and respect. They were willing to commit crimes against their own child, while simultaneously claiming to act in my best interests. That realization freed me from any remaining guilt about cutting them out of my life completely. I wasn't being stubborn or vindictive. I was protecting myself from people who had proven they would harm me financially, professionally, and emotionally to maintain control over my choices. As my 27th birthday approached, I was preparing to launch my own company and marry Emma, who had accepted my proposal during a weekend trip to New Orleans. My life was everything I had dreamed it could be during those dark months sleeping in my car. I had no idea that thousands of miles away, my parents' carefully constructed life was about to collapse in spectacular fashion, and they would soon be reaching out with the desperation of people who had finally run out of options. Time has a funny way of revealing truth. While I was building my success in Austin, apparently, my parents were busy creating their own catastrophe back home. I had maintained complete radio silence with them for 7 years. No phone calls, no emails, no contact through mutual acquaintances. As far as I was concerned, Robert and Janet had ceased to exist the moment they slammed that door in my face. My app company had been acquired by a major technology corporation 18 months earlier for a sum that exceeded my wildest expectations. The acquisition had set me up financially for life and led to my current position as Chief Technology Officer at a cutting-edge startup developing artificial intelligence solutions for small businesses. Emma and I had gotten married the previous year and purchased a beautiful home in one of Austin's most desirable neighborhoods. I was living proof that their predictions about my future had been completely wrong. Instead of crawling back home, begging for help, I had built exactly the kind of life they had insisted was impossible for someone like me. That's why I was completely unprepared for what happened on a Tuesday morning in March. I was reviewing code in my office when my phone started buzzing with calls from unknown numbers. The first call showed a number I didn't recognize, so I let it go to voicemail. Then, another call, and another. By lunchtime, my phone had received 15 calls from different numbers, all with the same area code from my hometown. Curiosity finally got the better of me, so I listened to the voicemails. What I heard left me stunned and confused. The first message was from my mother. "Norman, this is your mother. I know you don't want to hear from us, but we really need to talk. Please call me back at this number. It's important." The second message was from my father. "Son, we need your help. I know we haven't talked in years, but this is an emergency. Please call us back." Then came messages from numbers I didn't recognize, relatives, family friends, even neighbors, all asking me to contact my parents urgently. Apparently, Robert and Janet had been calling everyone they could think of who might have my phone number. The messages became increasingly desperate throughout the week. My parents left voicemails every few hours, sometimes crying, sometimes pleading, sometimes trying to sound casual and normal. They claimed they had been trying to reach me for months and apologized for past misunderstandings. Emma found the whole situation fascinating from a psychological perspective. 7 years of complete silence, and now suddenly they need to talk urgently, she observed. Something major must have happened for them to swallow their pride like this. I was torn between curiosity and caution. Part of me wanted to know what kind of emergency could have driven them to such desperation. Another part of me suspected this was some kind of manipulation designed to draw me back into their sphere of control. The breakthrough came when my cousin Derek, who I hadn't spoken to since high school, managed to track down my work email address and sent me a message that explained everything. "Norman, I don't know if you've heard about your parents' situation, but I thought you should know what's really going on. Your dad's accounting business collapsed last year after several clients discovered major errors in their tax filings. He's facing potential lawsuits and has lost most of his client base. Your mom has been gambling heavily and racked up huge debts. They're about to lose the house to foreclosure and have been telling everyone they're trying to reach you for help. I thought you deserved to know the truth about why they're suddenly so eager to reconnect." Derek's email painted a picture of complete financial ruin. Robert's accounting practice, which had been the foundation of my parents' comfortable middle-class lifestyle, had imploded due to his own professional mistakes. Several small business clients had discovered that his tax preparation errors had resulted in penalties and audits from the IRS. Word had spread through the small business community, and his reputation was destroyed. Janet's gambling addiction, which apparently had been developing for years, had accelerated as their financial situation deteriorated. She had been frequenting casinos and playing online poker, convincing herself that one big win would solve their problems. Instead, she had accumulated debt across multiple credit cards and personal loans. The house I had grown up in, the symbol of their stability and success, was scheduled for foreclosure in 30 days. They had refinanced it multiple times to extract equity for Robert's failing business and Janet's gambling debts. Now they owed more than the property was worth, and they had no means of making the payments. As I processed this information, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. There was satisfaction in knowing that their smug predictions about my future had been proven catastrophically wrong. There was also genuine shock at how completely their lives had unraveled. But underneath everything else was a sense of poetic justice that felt almost too perfect to be real. The same people who had lectured me about financial responsibility had destroyed their own finances through professional incompetence and addiction. The parents who had kicked me out for refusing to accept their wisdom were now facing the exact kind of financial crisis they had predicted for me. Emma encouraged me to investigate further before making any decisions about responding. "You don't owe them anything," she said, "but you might want to understand the full situation before deciding whether to engage." I hired a private investigator to research my parents' current circumstances, not because I intended to help them, but because I needed to understand what I might be dealing with if they continued their campaign to contact me. The investigator's report revealed details that were even more disturbing than Derek's email had suggested. Robert's accounting business hadn't just failed due to mistakes. He had been cutting corners and ignoring continuing education requirements for years. His license was under review by the state board, and several former clients were pursuing malpractice claims. Janet's gambling problem was more severe than anyone in the family realized. She had been hiding the extent of her losses from Robert, and had even taken out payday loans and cash advances to fund continued gambling. Their total debt, including the mortgage, credit cards, personal loans, and gambling losses, exceeded $200,000. Most shocking of all, they had been expecting me to fail and return home for the past 7 years. According to neighbors, the investigator interviewed Robert and Janet had been telling people that I would eventually come to my senses and return to help support them in their retirement. They had apparently planned for my success to become their financial safety net, despite having kicked me out and sabotaged my early career. The investigator also discovered that my parents had been tracking my success through social media and mutual acquaintances. They knew about my app company's acquisition, my marriage to Emma, and my current position. Their sudden, urgent need to reconnect wasn't motivated by parental love or genuine remorse. It was motivated by the realization that their golden goose was thriving while they were facing financial ruin. Armed with this information, I felt more confident about maintaining my distance. These weren't parents who had suddenly realized they missed their son and wanted to repair a damaged relationship. These were desperate people who viewed me as a potential solution to problems they had created for themselves. But then, the investigator uncovered one final piece of information that changed everything and forced me to reconsider my position entirely. The phone calls and voicemails continued relentlessly for weeks. My parents had escalated from daily messages to hourly attempts, sometimes calling from different numbers when I blocked their previous contacts. They enlisted every relative, family, friend, and acquaintance they could think of to serve as intermediaries in their desperate campaign to reach me. The messages evolved from vague requests for contact to increasingly specific pleas for help. Robert left voicemails admitting his business failures and promising to make amends for past mistakes. Janet recorded tearful confessions about her gambling addiction and begged for a chance to explain their situation face to face. "Norman, this is your father," came one particularly painful message. "I know we made terrible mistakes when you were younger. I know we didn't support your dreams the way we should have. We were wrong about everything, and we're sorry. Please give us a chance to make things right." Another message from Janet was even more heartbreaking. "Sweetheart, I've been going to Gamblers Anonymous meetings and getting help for my addiction. I know we hurt you badly, and I know we don't deserve your forgiveness. But we're your parents, and we love you. Please don't let us lose our home without at least talking to us." Emma watched me struggle with these emotional appeals and offered perspective when I needed it most. "They're saying everything you probably wished you could hear from them years ago," she pointed out. "But you have to consider whether they mean it or whether they're just desperate enough to say whatever they think will work." The desperation reached a new level when I discovered my parents had hired a private investigator to find my current address. Emma called me at work one afternoon to report that a suspicious man had been asking neighbors questions about our schedules and daily routines. When she approached him directly, he admitted he had been hired by Robert and Janet to locate me. That evening, I found my parents waiting in their car outside our house. They looked older, more fragile, and more desperate than I remembered. Robert had gained weight and appeared exhausted, while Janet seemed to have aged years in just the past few months. When they saw me pull into the driveway, They both got out of their car and approached with obvious anxiety. "Please don't call the police," Robert said immediately, raising his hands in a gesture of surrender. "We just need 5 minutes to talk to you. We drove 12 hours to get here." Janet was crying before she even opened her mouth. "Norman, we know we don't have any right to ask for anything from you. We know we were terrible parents, and we ruined your trust. But we're facing foreclosure in 2 weeks, and we don't have anywhere else to turn." I stood there in my driveway, looking at these broken people who had once seemed so powerful and controlling in my life. They were begging me for help, exactly as they had predicted I would beg them 7 years earlier. The role reversal was complete and devastating. Emma joined me outside and positioned herself protectively beside me, clearly prepared to call for help if the situation escalated. But there was no threat here, just desperate people who had finally run out of options and delusions. "We'll leave if you want us to," Robert continued, his voice shaking with emotion. "But we had to try to reach you. We had to try to explain what happened and ask for your help. You're our son, and you're the only family we have left." The conversation that followed was unlike anything we had ever shared during my childhood or young adulthood. For the first time in my life, Robert and Janet spoke to me with complete honesty about their failures, their fears, and their desperate circumstances. They admitted that kicking me out had been a catastrophic mistake, born from their need to control me rather than support me. They acknowledged that sabotaging my job applications and spreading rumors about my character had been cruel and destructive. They even confessed to the identity theft, claiming they had convinced themselves it was temporary borrowing that they would repay once I came to my senses and returned home. "We thought we knew what was best for you," Janet said through her tears. "We were so afraid of watching you fail that we didn't give you the chance to succeed. We realize now that we were protecting our own feelings, not yours." Robert's admissions were even more painful to hear. "I watched you thrive after you left us, and instead of being proud, I was angry. I was angry that you had proven us wrong. I was angry that you didn't need us the way we thought you should. I sabotaged you because I couldn't accept that my son was stronger and smarter than I was." But the most shocking revelation came when they explained the true scope of their current crisis. Janet's gambling addiction had been triggered by Robert's heart attack 18 months earlier, which had left him unable to work full-time, while his accounting practice was already struggling. The medical bills combined with lost income, and Janet's desperate attempts to win money to solve their problems, had created a perfect storm of financial destruction. More devastating still was Janet's recent cancer diagnosis. She had been experiencing symptoms for months, but had avoided seeking medical treatment because they couldn't afford the costs, and had lost their health insurance when Robert's business failed. "The doctors say we caught it early enough for treatment to be effective," Janet explained, "but the chemotherapy and medications are expensive, and we don't qualify for assistance programs because we still technically own the house." I stood there processing this information and struggling with emotions I hadn't expected to feel. These people had traumatized me, betrayed me, and attempted to destroy my future. But they were also human beings facing medical crisis and financial ruin, and despite everything they had done, they were still my parents. Emma squeezed my hand and whispered, "Whatever you decide, I'll support you. But you don't have to make any decisions tonight." I told my parents they could stay in a local hotel overnight, and that I would consider their situation and give them an answer the next day. They thanked me repeatedly and drove away, looking like condemned prisoners who had been granted a brief reprieve. That night, Emma and I stayed up late discussing the implications of my parents' request. The financial help they needed was substantial, but manageable given my current resources. The more complex question was whether helping them would provide the closure I needed, or simply open me up to continued manipulation and control. "They're saying all the right things now," Emma observed, "but they've had 7 years to reach out and apologize. Why is it only happening now that they need money? That was the question that would determine my response. Were Robert and Janet finally ready to acknowledge their mistakes and build a healthy relationship, or were they simply desperate enough to say whatever they thought would convince me to solve their problems? The answer would define not just their future, but mine as well. The next morning brought clarity that had been impossible to achieve during the emotional confrontation in my driveway. Emma and I spent hours discussing not just what my parents needed, but what I needed from this situation to move forward with my own peace of mind. You have the power here, Emma reminded me, as we prepared for what I knew would be the most important conversation of my life. You get to set the terms of any relationship going forward. You don't have to choose between helping them and protecting yourself. I met my parents at a quiet restaurant near their hotel, choosing a public location where we could have an honest conversation without the emotional intensity that had characterized our previous encounter. Robert and Janet looked nervous and hopeful as they sat across from me, clearly understanding that their future depended on the next few hours. I began by acknowledging the courage it had taken for them to drive to Austin and face the son they had wronged so severely. But I also made it clear that any assistance from me would come with non-negotiable conditions designed to protect everyone involved. I've listened to your apologies, I said, and I believe you're sincere about regretting your past actions. But remorse isn't enough to rebuild a relationship that was destroyed by years of betrayal and manipulation. If we're going to move forward, it has to be based on complete honesty and clear boundaries. My first requirement was full financial transparency. If I was going to help with their medical and housing costs, I needed complete access to their financial records and the right to monitor their spending going forward. Janet's gambling addiction and Robert's business failures had demonstrated that they couldn't be trusted to manage money responsibly without oversight. I'm not trying to control you, I explained, but I'm also not going to enable destructive behavior or watch you waste resources that could have been used for Janet's medical treatment. My second requirement was formal restitution for the identity theft and stolen inheritance. I had documentation of the fraudulent credit accounts and the value of my grandfather's motorcycle collection. They needed to acknowledge these crimes officially and agree to a structured repayment plan that would restore what they had stolen, even if it took years to complete. This isn't about punishment, I told them. It's about taking responsibility for the harm you caused and making concrete efforts to repair the damage. My third and most important requirement was respect for my autonomy and my relationship with Emma. They needed to accept that I was an adult who could make his own decisions about career finances and personal relationships. Any future attempts to manipulate control or interfere with my choices would result in immediate termination of all contact and assistance. You can be part of my life as my parents, I said, but you can't be managers of my life. That job belongs to me now. Robert and Janet listened to my conditions with a mixture of relief and resignation. They clearly understood that they were in no position to negotiate or make demands. Their previous confidence in their ability to control me had been replaced by genuine humility and desperation. We accept everything you've outlined, Robert said without hesitation. We're grateful for any help you're willing to provide, and we understand that we haven't earned the right to expect anything from you. Janet nodded emphatically through her tears. We just want the chance to show you that we can be the parents you deserve to have all along. We know it's probably too late for that, but we want to try. Over the following months, I provided carefully structured assistance that addressed their immediate needs while protecting my own interests. I paid for Janet's medical treatments directly to the healthcare providers, ensuring that the money went toward her cancer treatment rather than other expenses. I negotiated with their mortgage company to arrange a modification that would allow them to keep their home while addressing their debt more realistically. Most importantly, I helped them connect with professional resources for their underlying problems. Janet began working with a counselor who specialized in gambling addiction, while Robert enrolled in continuing education courses to restore his professional credentials and rebuild his accounting practice on a smaller, more sustainable scale. The process wasn't always smooth or comfortable. There were moments when old patterns of behavior emerged, and I had to remind my parents firmly about the boundaries we had established. But for the first time in my life, they respected my authority and worked to address my concerns rather than dismissing them. Emma played a crucial role in helping me navigate this complex reconciliation. Her perspective as someone outside our family dynamic helped me recognize when I was being too harsh or too lenient in my expectations. More importantly, she supported my decision to engage with my parents while maintaining her own boundaries about how much involvement she was comfortable with. The most meaningful moment came 6 months later, when Robert called to thank me for something I had never expected to hear from him. "I want you to know how proud I am of the man you've become," he said during one of our monthly check-in calls. "Watching you build your success, and then choose to help us, despite everything we did wrong. That takes strength and character I didn't think I had taught you." "You didn't teach me that," I replied honestly. "I learned it in spite of the lessons you tried to teach me." "You're right," Robert acknowledged. "But you learned it anyway, and that makes me prouder than any achievement of my own ever could." Janet's cancer treatment was successful, and her recovery gave our family a chance to build new relationships based on mutual respect rather than control and resentment. She became genuinely interested in my work and my marriage, asking thoughtful questions and offering support rather than criticism. The financial restitution took nearly 2 years to complete, but my parents followed through on every payment without complaint or excuse. When they made the final payment for my grandfather's stolen motorcycles, Robert included a handwritten note that I keep in my office as a reminder of how far we had all traveled. "This money can't restore the motorcycles or undo the pain we caused." The note read, "But it represents our commitment to earning back your trust one payment at a time." As I reflect on this journey from that terrible night, when they slammed the door in my face, to today, when we maintain a respectful and loving relationship, I'm struck by the lessons that emerged from such a painful experience. I learned that sometimes the people who claim to love you will try to limit you out of their own fear and insecurity. I learned that success isn't just about achieving your goals, but about having the strength to forgive and set boundaries with people who have hurt you. Most importantly, I learned that real power isn't about controlling others. It's about controlling your own responses to the challenges life presents. My parents learned that love means supporting someone's dreams, even when you don't understand them, and that respect must be earned through actions rather than demanded through authority. They discovered that true family relationships are built on trust and mutual support, not control and manipulation. Emma and I are now planning to start our own family, and I'm confident that the lessons I learned from my parents' mistakes will help me become a better father than they were able to be. I want to support my children's dreams, celebrate their independence, and earn their respect through my actions rather than demanding it through my position. The 7 years I spent building my success without my parents' help weren't just about proving them wrong. They were about proving to myself that I could overcome any obstacle and create the life I wanted. When they finally reached out begging for help, I had the strength to respond with wisdom rather than anger. Today, my phone doesn't buzz with desperate missed calls. Instead, it carries messages of support, encouragement, and genuine love from parents who learned to respect the man their rejection helped me become. The tables didn't just turn. They transformed into a foundation for the family relationships I had always wanted but never thought possible. Sometimes the greatest victories aren't about defeating your opponents, but about helping them become the people they were always capable of being. That's the power of choosing forgiveness without surrendering your boundaries, and success without surrendering your humanity. What about you? Have you ever had to cut ties with family members who were holding you back from your dreams? How did you find the strength to prioritize your own growth over other people's expectations? Share your story in the comments below, because your experience might inspire someone else who's facing a similar crossroads. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button to help others find it. Subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming family challenges and building success on your own terms. And share this video with anyone who might need to hear that it's possible to rebuild relationships without sacrificing the independence you fought so hard to achieve. Thank you for listening to my story, and I wish you the courage to pursue your dreams, no matter who doubts you along the way.